The main hall of the Grand Hotel had never known a silence so deafening. 200 of Rio de Janeiro's most powerful people stopped breathing at once, as if an invisible director had shouted, "Cut!" in the middle of a scene. Laura Cavalcanti stood at the main entrance, her gloved hands delicately clutching a small, pearl-beaded clutch. The midnight blue dress she had chosen with such care just 2 hours before now felt like armor against the wave of humiliation crashing over her. In the center of the ballroom, beneath a crystal chandelier that cost more than a house, Vicente Cavalcanti had his arm linked with a woman who was not his wife. Melissa was smiling, as if posing for a magazine cover, utterly oblivious to the fact that she had just become the star of the decade's biggest social scandal. Vicente felt the world crumble the moment his eyes met Laura's. 20 years of marriage, of partnership, of building an empire together, all of it shattering in the space of a single glance. Laura did not scream. She did not make a scene. She did not collapse into tears like the heroines of a dramatic soap opera. Instead, she did something infinitely more devastating. She walked. Her Louboutin heels echoed on the Italian marble like a countdown to the end of a world. Each step was a sentence, each movement a silent farewell. The city's elite, accustomed to whispered scandals and veiled betrayals, had never witnessed anything so cinematic, so cruelly elegant. When Laura stopped 2 meters from her husband, the scent of Chanel No. 5, the perfume she had worn for 2 decades, seemed to hang differently in the air. More seductive, more melancholic. A fragrant epitaph for a love that had just died. 20 years, Vicente, she whispered, her voice low, yet clear enough for the front rows of onlookers to hear. 20 years. There was no accusation in those words, no anger, only a sorrow so profound it cut deeper than any shout ever could. Then Laura turned, a graceful, almost dance-like movement, and walked back toward the exit. The same steps, the same echo on the marble, but now they carried a dignity that transformed her humiliation into the most stunning moral victory that ballroom had ever witnessed. Vicente stood frozen like a statue. Melissa still clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory that had suddenly lost all its value. The man who controlled millions, who commanded empires, who decided the fates of hundreds of employees, discovered he no longer even knew how to breathe. The silence lasted for exactly 43 seconds, long enough for 200 people to forever burn into their memories the moment Laura Cavalcanti transformed from a betrayed wife into an icon of dignity, and long enough for Vicente Cavalcanti to realize he had lost not just a wife, but the only person in the world who had loved him for the man he was beneath all the zeros in his bank account. This is the story of a night that destroyed a marriage, and of a woman who was reborn from the ashes of her own humiliation. This is the story of the ball where the truth arrived too late to save a love, but just in time to save a soul. The story begins 3 days earlier, when Vicente Cavalcanti made the decision that would forever change the course of 3 lives. 3 days before the ball, Vicente Cavalcanti adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt as he studied his reflection in the walk-in closet's mirror. At 45, he maintained the physique of a man who spent 2 hours a day in his penthouse's private gym, and the posture of a man accustomed to being in command. The silver at his temples only enhanced the mature charm that made him irresistible, not just in business, but also to Melissa Andrade. The reflection showed more than a successful CEO. It revealed a man torn between two worlds, two women, two versions of himself. One version who came home every night to Laura, his wife of 20 years, and another who met Melissa 3 times a week in the Ipanema apartment he kept for his business meetings. Mr. Vicente, Carmen, the housekeeper who had been with the family for 15 years, announced through the closet's intercom. Mrs. Laura would like to know if you'll be home for lunch today. Vicente hesitated for a fraction of a second. Tell her I have meetings until late, Carmen. I'll go straight to the club. The lie slipped out so naturally, he no longer felt the weight of it. The club was code for the penthouse apartment where Melissa was waiting, likely already dressed in the expensive lingerie he'd bought her on his last trip to Paris. On the other side of the penthouse, in the art studio that occupied the entire east wing, Laura Cavalcanti was completely absorbed in her canvases. At 42, she possessed the timeless elegance of a woman who knew that true beauty came from within. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders as she reviewed the final details of the exhibition she was curating for the Foundation's gala. Darling, have you seen my schedule for today? Vicente's voice echoed through the studio, breaking her concentration. Laura looked up from the canvases, her face lighting up with a smile that could still make Vicente's heart skip a beat, even after all these years, even in the midst of his betrayal. It's on the entryway table, my love. You have the meeting with the German investors at 2, remember? And Carmen made that salmon you adore for dinner. She walked over to him, adjusting his tie with the easy intimacy of a 2-decade marriage. How are you feeling about the opening speech for the ball? I know you've been nervous. A tightness gripped Vicente's chest. Laura could always read his emotions, but this time she mistook his guilt-ridden anxiety for professional stress. I'm fine, just focused on work, he lied, kissing her gently on the forehead. The scent of her Chanel No. 5, the one she'd worn since they met, brought a rush of memories. Their first date at an art gallery, the proposal in Paris, the joint construction of the empire he now commanded. I'm sure it will be perfect, as always. Laura smiled, turning back to her canvases. By the way, I've decided on a dress for the ball. The navy blue one we bought in Milan. Do you remember it? He remembered. It was the dress she had worn the last time they made love, 3 weeks ago. Since then, his nights had been filled with excuses of exhaustion and late work. You'll look beautiful, he murmured, already heading for the door. I'll see you tonight. The Ipanema apartment was everything Vicente's home was not. Modern, audacious, and charged with a raw, sexual energy that made him feel alive again. Melissa Andrade was waiting on the balcony, her body, sculpted in expensive gyms and aesthetic clinics, showcased by a red bikini that cost more than many of his employees' monthly salaries. You're late, she purred, approaching with the feline grace of a woman who knew exactly the power she wielded over men. Endless meetings, Vicente lied again, pulling her into his arms. Melissa smelled of coconut oil and ambition, an intoxicating combination that momentarily made him forget the respectable life he had built with Laura. I have a surprise for you, Melissa whispered against his ear as she unbuttoned his shirt. My stylist found the perfect dress for the ball. An exclusive, red Valentino. I'm going to make quite an impression when you finally introduce me to Rio society. Vicente froze. For 2 years, he had managed to keep Melissa a delicious secret and escape from the responsibility of being Vicente Cavalcanti, the exemplary businessman, the devoted husband, the pillar of the community. But Melissa was no longer an impressionable young woman satisfied with expensive gifts and weekends at secluded resorts. She wanted more. She wanted recognition. She wanted the status of being the woman on the arm of one of Rio's most powerful men. Melissa, we talked about this. The ball is a corporate event. I can't what? She pulled away, her green eyes flashing with a mix of desire and determination. Can't be seen with me in public? Vicente, for 2 years, you've been promising me you'll leave her, that our situation will be resolved. I'm tired of being your dirty little secret. The word secret cut deep. That's exactly what she was. Not love, not true passion, but a secret that fed an ego bruised by the routine of a long-term marriage. It's different this time, Vicente murmured, pulling her back into his arms. Laura isn't going to the ball. She said she has a headache, wants to stay home and finish curating the exhibition. It will be the perfect opportunity for me to introduce you to everyone. It was another lie, a monumental one. Laura had confirmed her attendance weeks ago and was looking forward to the event. But in the heat of the moment, with Melissa pressed against him and his own desires clouding his judgment, the lie seemed like the easiest solution. Melissa's eyes lit up like two emeralds. Really? You're taking me as your official date? As my business partner, Vicente corrected, trying to maintain some shred of rationality. You can say you're investing in the real estate market, that we're partners in a new venture. Melissa smiled, but it was a calculated smile, heavy with a satisfaction that went far beyond a romantic gesture. Perfect. It's going to be our night, Vicente. The night I finally stop being invisible in your life. While Vicente sealed his own condemnation in Melissa's arms, Laura was in her studio, completely unaware of the approaching storm. She worked meticulously on the final arrangement of the artworks for the ball, each piece chosen to tell a story of love, loss, and renewal. Her assistant, Marina, entered with a tray of tea and biscuits. Donna Laura, the seamstress, brought the dress for the final fitting. Would you like to try it on now? Laura looked up from the catalogs, her smile tired but content. Of course, Marina. This ball is going to be special. It's the first time in years Vicente and I will have a night that's just for us, without the pressures of work or business trips. Marina helped Laura into the elegant navy blue gown. The Italian silk hugged her mature curves with a quiet grace, the neckline hinting at sophistication without being vulgar. It was the kind of dress that made a woman feel both powerful and feminine. You look breathtaking, Marina commented, adjusting a final detail. Senor Vicente won't be able to take his eyes off you. Laura smiled at her reflection. At 42, she still felt desirable, still believed in the power of the mature love she had built with Vicente. She didn't see that her husband's increasingly frequent absences, the secret phone calls, the business trips that stretched longer than necessary, were all signs of a betrayal that was about to explode in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. You know, Marina, she said softly, sometimes I feel like Vicente is distant, but I'm sure it's just the stress from work. After the ball, we're going to take a vacation, just the two of us. Maybe go back to Positano, where we had our honeymoon. Marina smiled, but a shadow of sadness crossed her eyes. As a loyal employee, she had noticed certain inconsistencies in Vicente's schedule, certain unexplained expenses, small lies that were piling up like evidence of a reality Laura refused to see. That night, Vicente came home at 11:30 to find Laura asleep on the library sofa, still in her work clothes, surrounded by art books and exhibition catalogs. She had waited up to have dinner with him, as she always did. He watched her sleep and felt a pang of something that might have been regret. Laura was beautiful, even when she was exhausted, even after 20 years. She represented everything good he had built in his life: stability, respect, a deep and genuine love. But in the Ipanema penthouse, Melissa represented everything he felt he was losing: youth, passion, the thrill of being desired by a woman who didn't know all his flaws. Vicente covered Laura with a blanket and gently kissed her forehead. "Forgive me," he whispered into the darkness, not knowing if he was asking forgiveness for his past sins or for what he was about to do. Deep down, he knew that taking Melissa to the ball was crossing a line from which there was no return. It was turning a private betrayal into a public scandal. It was humiliating the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 2 decades. But his arrogance, fueled by years of success and social admiration, whispered that he could control the situation, that he could have the respect of society, the love of Laura once she accepted the new reality, and the passion of Melissa as his official partner. Vicente Cavalcanti, the man who built an empire by foreseeing every risk and calculating every consequence, was about to make the most foolish decision of his life. In 3 days, at the Grand Hotel, all of Rio's elite would witness the exact moment his arrogance became his undoing. The Grand Hotel had been transformed into a cathedral of crystal and light. Arrangements of white orchids and champagne roses adorned every table, while floating candles cast golden reflections in the baccarat crystal glasses. The main ballroom, with its ornate ceiling and century-old chandeliers, had never hosted an event as splendid as the Foundation's annual ball, nor one that would prove to be so explosive. Vicente Cavalcanti adjusted his Armani tuxedo for the 10th time as he waited for Melissa in the hotel lobby. It was 8:30 p.m., and the ball was in full swing, but he had calculated a strategic entrance, late enough to make an impact, yet early enough to introduce Melissa to the city's most influential figures. His fingers drummed nervously against his thigh. For the first time in years, Vicente Cavalcanti, the man who commanded empires without blinking, felt butterflies in his stomach. It wasn't anxiety he felt, but something far more dangerous: the thrill of a man about to torch the very foundations of the life he'd built. "Vicente, darling!" Melissa's voice echoed through the lobby, a herald of her own arrival. Vicente turned, and the air seemed to vanish from his lungs. She was a vision in Valentino red, a dress that clung to her form not like a second skin, but like a whispered promise. Its daring neckline left little to the imagination, and the liquid silk of the gown rippled with every step, a flame in motion. "You are—" Vicente swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Perfect." Melissa smiled, fully aware of the power she wielded. Her blonde hair cascaded over her bare shoulders in immaculate Hollywood waves. The diamond necklace he had given her last month glittered against her sun-kissed skin. She approached him with the unshakable confidence of a woman who knew the world was hers to conquer. Ready to introduce me to your society? She purred, linking her arm through his as if she had been his official partner for years. For a fraction of a second, Vicente hesitated. There was still time to retreat, to invent an excuse, to salvage the marriage he had built with Laura. But the intoxicating power of having a woman like Melissa on his arm, of finally shedding the masks and the lies, was stronger than his conscience. More than ready, he lied to himself. Let's show them all who the new star of our society is. While Vicente sealed his fate in the hotel lobby, Laura was at home, applying the final touches to her makeup. She had chosen a classic look, smoky eyes that accentuated the deep blue of her irises, and a nude lipstick that complemented the timeless elegance of her features. The navy blue dress she adored was laid out on the bed, waiting for her like an old, trusted friend. Carmen, has Vicente left already? Laura asked, fastening the pearl earrings that had been a wedding gift. Yes, ma'am. He said he had a quick meeting before the gala and would meet you there. Carmen paused, her brow furrowed. Ma'am Laura, may I say something? Laura stopped, sensing the unease in her housekeeper's voice. Of course, Carmen. What is it? Forgive me for speaking out of turn, but Senor Vicente has been very different lately. He has always been a busy man, but now, Carmen searched for the right words. Now, it feels like he is hiding something. A chill ran down Laura's spine, but she quickly dismissed it. Carmen had a flair for the dramatic, always seeing conspiracy where there was only business. He's just stressed with the new ventures, Carmen. You know my husband. When he's focused on a project, he tunes everything else out. Laura smiled, carefully slipping into the dress. But tonight will be different. We'll finally have time to talk, to reconnect. Carmen nodded, but the worry never left her eyes. 15 years with the family had taught her to read the signs her employers preferred to ignore. Laura admired her reflection in the full-length mirror. The navy dress made her look elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without being pretentious. It was a perfect match for her personality. Classic, timeless, dependable. Perfect, she murmured to herself. Vicente will remember why he fell in love with me. The grand ballroom of the hotel hummed with the elite of Rio de Janeiro. A symphony of power, money, and influence played out among industrialists, politicians, artists, and socialites. Conversations flowed in a dozen languages, punctuated by the clinking of Dom Perignon flutes and the soft melodies of a string quartet. Fernanda Almeida, editor of Rio's most influential society magazine, moved through the crowd, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's, sniffing out scandal from a mile away. She knew all their secrets. Who was secretly bankrupt? Who was cheating? Which marriages were merely facades for financial convenience? Roberto, have you seen Vicente Cavalcanti tonight? She asked her photographer discreetly. Hasn't arrived yet, but I've heard some interesting rumors. Roberto leaned in, lowering his voice. Word on the street is he's been seen with a certain blonde in Ipanema. A model, they say. Fernanda's journalistic instincts flared. And does Laura know? If she did, she wouldn't be here smiling like she always does. That woman lives in a fantasy world. She thinks her husband is a saint. Before Fernanda could reply, a murmur rippled through the room. Every head turned toward the main entrance. Vicente Cavalcanti had just arrived, and on his arm was a breathtaking woman in a scarlet dress. My God, Fernanda whispered, the headlines already forming in her mind. He didn't. He actually did it. Vicente strode into the ballroom with Melissa as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He carried himself with the pride of a conqueror, oblivious to the stunned gazes and whispers that spread like wildfire among the guests. Vicente, Eduardo Marquez, president of the Federation of Industries, approached with a strained smile. What a surprise to see you here with. He extended a hand to Melissa, his eyes searching Vicente's face for an explanation. Eduardo, I'd like to introduce Melissa Andrade, Vicente said with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. My new business partner. We're developing a revolutionary project together in Barra de Tijuca. Melissa smiled like an actress on her Broadway debut. It's a pleasure to meet you, Eduardo. Vicente speaks so highly of his friends at the Cultural Foundation. Eduardo shook her hand, his mind racing. Vicente Cavalcanti, the consummate family man, was introducing a woman who was clearly more than a business partner, as if nothing were amiss. And Laura? Eduardo asked cautiously. Is she not coming tonight? A muscle twitched in Vicente's jaw, but his smile remained fixed. Laura is home with a migraine. She wanted to rest up to finalize the curation for the exhibition. It was a lie so blatant that Eduardo nearly choked on his champagne. He had known Laura for years. She would never miss the foundation's gala, especially when she was the head curator. Across the ballroom, similar conversations were unfolding. Vicente paraded Melissa around like a peacock, introducing her to everyone who mattered. Some, the more diplomatic, offered polite greetings and quickly changed the subject. Others were more direct. Vicente, my dear boy, began Dr. Henrique Castelo Branco, the patriarch of one of Rio's oldest families. Where is our beloved Laura? I haven't seen her in months. As I was just explaining to Eduardo, she's suffering from a migraine. You know how these art curators are, such perfectionists. She works herself to exhaustion. At 78, Dr. Enrique had seen enough of society to recognize an explosive situation. What a shame. I have always admired her work. And you, my dear? He said, turning to Melissa with the icy courtesy of the old guard. Are you also in the arts? Actually, I'm a model, Melissa replied with a radiant smile, completely oblivious to the temperature drop around her. But Vicente is teaching me about the business world. I'm discovering I have a natural talent for real estate investment. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Henrique took a slow sip of his champagne. How interesting. And how long have you two been working together? 2 years, Vicente interjected quickly, trying to regain control. 2 years, Dr. Henrique repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. What a productive partnership. From a distance, Fernanda Almeida watched it all, making mental notes of every interaction, every scandalized glance, every hushed whisper. She could already see the headline, CEO Cavalcanti debuts, mistress at gala while wife stays home. Roberto, are you getting all of this? She asked her photographer. Every second. This will be the talk of the town for months. For years, Fernanda corrected. Vicente Cavalcanti has just committed social suicide, and the worst part is, he doesn't even know it yet. At precisely 9:15 p.m., Vicente's phone vibrated. He ignored it, focused on introducing Melissa to the city's mayor. It vibrated again, and again. Finally, he glanced at the screen. They were all from Carmen, the housekeeper. Señor Vicente, Ma'am Laura has left the house. She said her headache passed. Señor Vicente, she looked beautiful. The blue dress, as always. Señor Vicente, she should arrive in about 15 minutes. Vicente felt the blood drain from his face. It was 9:15. Laura would be here in 15 minutes. Melissa was clinging to his arm, a crimson beacon for all to see. And he, Vicente Cavalcanti, a man who calculated every risk, had just realized he'd made the most catastrophic error of his life. Melissa, he whispered urgently, we need to leave. Leave? Why? The party is just getting started. You haven't even introduced me to the governor. Now, Melissa, we have to leave right now. But it was too late. Across the room, Fernando Silva, an old friend of Laura's, had just received a text. Arriving in 5. Can't wait to see Vicente and all our friends. The stage was set. The actors were in position. And in exactly 5 minutes, Laura Cavalcanti would make her entrance into one of the most devastating scenes the Rio elite had ever witnessed. Vicente looked at Melissa, resplendent and oblivious. He looked at the 200 guests, watching them with a mixture of fascination and horror, and he finally understood. There was no way out, no explanation, no lie elaborate enough to cover what was about to happen. In 5 minutes, 20 years of marriage would be annihilated before the eyes of everyone who mattered. And the only thought in Vicente's mind was, how could I have been so stupid? At 9:20 p.m., a silver Rolls-Royce glided to a stop before the grand entrance of the hotel. A uniformed doorman hurried to open the door, and Laura Cavalcanti emerged, a vision of timeless elegance. Her midnight blue gown flowed around her like water, and her brown hair, swept into a sophisticated low chignon, revealed a graceful neck adorned only by a string of pearls. Vicente's anniversary gift from the year before. Good evening, Mrs. Cavalcanti. The doorman smiled respectfully. The gala is magnificent tonight. Thank you, Carlos, Laura replied, remembering his name as she always did. Has my husband arrived? Carlos hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes betraying a discomfort Laura couldn't quite place. Ah, yes, ma'am. He arrived about an hour ago. Laura nodded, adjusting her small pearl clutch as she walked toward the entrance. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the polished marble, each step filled with the anticipation of a woman hoping to reconnect with her husband on a special night. Inside the ballroom, Vicente could feel sweat trickling down his back despite the chilled air. Every second stretched into an eternity, each beat of his heart a drum announcing the impending disaster. He had tried to pull Melissa from the room 3 times in the last 5 minutes, but she refused to grasp the urgency. Vicente, you're acting strangely, Melissa muttered, adjusting the already provocative neckline of her dress. I thought you wanted to show me off to all of Rio. Now you seem desperate to hide me. Melissa, please, just trust me. We need to go, now. But why? I'm having fun. The governor said he'd invite me to his next charity event, and the mayor's wife adored my dress. Vicente scanned the room, searching desperately for an escape. But he was trapped in a labyrinth of familiar faces, all watching him with a blend of morbid curiosity and malicious glee. Fernando Silva, Laura's friend, watched him with an expression of pity and contempt. Fernanda Almeida, the dreaded columnist, hadn't taken her eyes off him, clearly savoring every second of the unfolding drama. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies' voice boomed through the sound system. I would like to announce that our esteemed art curator, the distinguished Mrs. Laura Cavalcanti, has just arrived and will be joining us in a few moments to present this evening's exhibition. The announcement fell on Vicente like a tombstone. Melissa turned to him, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Laura Cavalcanti? Isn't that your ex-wife's name? She's not my ex-wife, Vicente murmured, the words like molten lead in his throat. She's my wife. Still my wife. Melissa's face transformed. Confusion gave way to understanding, understanding to rage, and rage to an icy fury that made her look both more beautiful and infinitely more dangerous. Your wife? You told me you were separated, that it was just a matter of paperwork. Melissa, I can explain. Explain what? That you brought me here to publicly humiliate her? That you used me as a weapon in a marital war I didn't even know I was a part of? But before Vicente could answer, a strange silence began to ripple through the ballroom. It started near the entrance, spreading inexorably from table to table, conversation to conversation, until 200 people fell silent at once. Laura stood poised at the grand entrance to the ballroom, one hand resting delicately on the marble doorframe, her blue eyes scanning the glittering assembly for her husband. She was smiling, the radiant smile of a woman anticipating a special moment with the person she loves. And then she saw him. In the center of the hall, beneath the main chandelier that bathed everything in a cruel golden light, Vicente stood with his arm linked through that of a stunning woman in a red dress. A woman who was young, voluptuous, and who clung to him with the intimacy of a lover, not a business associate. Laura's smile did not vanish immediately. For a few precious seconds, her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. There had to be an explanation. It had to be a misunderstanding. It had to be anything but what it appeared to be. But then Vicente turned, and their eyes met across the ballroom. And on the face of the man she had loved for 20 years, Laura saw not surprise, not innocence, but a guilt so profound it seemed to have roots in his very soul. The realization hit Laura like a freight train. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't gentle. It was a brutal impact that made her feel as if the marble floor had vanished from beneath her feet. The silence that fell over the ballroom was preternatural. 200 people, business tycoons accustomed to commanding crowds, politicians skilled in public speaking, socialites who lived on conversation. All of them were mute, all of them watching, all of them witnesses to what promised to be the most devastating scandal of the decade. Fernanda Almeida gripped Roberto's arm. Are you recording? Every second, he whispered back. This is going to be historic. Laura began to walk. She did not run. She did not scream. She did not make the hysterical scene so many women would have. Instead, she walked with the dignity of a queen, proceeding to her own execution. Her Louboutin heels echoed on the marble, a countdown to the end of a world. Each step was perfectly measured, each movement imbued with an elegance that transformed her humiliation into something almost majestic. Vicente couldn't move, as if his legs had turned to lead. Melissa, finally sensing the magnitude of the situation, tried to disentangle herself, but Vicente clutched her instinctively. Not out of love or protection, but because she had become his only anchor in a reality that was shattering around him. Laura stopped 2 meters from the couple. Up close, she could see every detail. Melissa's perfect red lipstick, the diamond necklace that she herself had helped Vicente choose as a gift for a special client months ago, the obvious intimacy between them that spoke of a connection far deeper than any business partnership. 20 years, Laura said, her voice low, yet clear enough for the first few rows of onlookers to hear. There was no accusation in those words, no hysteria, only a sorrow so deep it cut sharper than any scream. Vicente tried to speak, but found he had forgotten how to form words. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound emerged. 20 years, Vicente, Laura repeated, and now her voice carried something new. Not pain, but a kind of glacial discovery. 20 years building a life I thought was ours. Melissa, still pinned to Vicente's arm, realizing she had become an unwilling accomplice to a cruelty she never intended, finally found her voice. I didn't know, she stammered. He told me he was separated, that it was just a matter of paperwork. Laura turned to her, and for the first time in her adult life, Melissa shrank under another woman's gaze. It wasn't a look of anger or jealousy. It was far worse. It was the look of absolute comprehension from a woman who was finally seeing the entire truth. You're very beautiful, Laura said softly, and the kindness in her voice was more devastating than any insult. He always had good taste in women. The sentence struck Vicente like a punch to the gut. Laura wasn't just talking about Melissa. She was making it clear that she knew, that perhaps she had always known. There had been others before. Laura, Vicente finally managed to whisper, I can explain. Explain? Laura tilted her head slightly, as if considering the proposition. Explain how you brought me flowers last week while you were buying her jewelry? Explain how you told me you loved me yesterday morning after spending the night with her? Explain how you made me believe I was special when I was merely convenient? Each word was a precise, deadly blade. Vicente realized that Laura wasn't discovering his betrayal now. She was revealing that she had known, for a long time, and had chosen to silently carry that pain alone. Why, Vicente? Laura asked, and for the first time, her voice trembled slightly. Why didn't you have the decency to leave me first? Why did you have to humiliate me like this, in front of our entire world, in front of people who respect me? He felt tears burning his eyes, tears of shame, of regret, of a pain so acute it made him want to disappear on the spot. I thought I could have both worlds. I thought I could have both worlds, Laura repeated, nodding slowly. Of course, the respectable wife for social appearances, and the young mistress for what? To feel powerful? To feel desired? To pretend you weren't getting old? The analysis was so precise, so surgical, that Vicente felt utterly exposed before the 200 pairs of eyes that watched them. Laura turned to Melissa again. How old are you, dear? 20, 28, Melissa answered, her voice barely a whisper. The same age I was when I married him, Laura smiled sadly. What poetic irony. The silence in the ballroom was so complete that the sound of a glass being set on a table rang out like a thunderclap. Fernanda Almeida was transcribing every word on her phone, knowing she was witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed by high society for decades. Laura took a step back, creating a physical distance that symbolized the emotional one she was establishing. I hope, she said, her voice regaining its strength, that you two will be happy, truly, because the price you've paid for this happiness is far too high for it to be wasted. Vicente reached a hand toward her, a desperate gesture from a man finally realizing what he was losing. Laura, please, Not like this. We can talk in private. We can talk, Laura laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. Vicente, you chose to make this public when you brought your mistress to the gala where I was being honored. You chose to humiliate me in front of 200 people who know us, who know our history. No, my love, you lost the right to privacy the moment you decided to turn our tragedy into a spectacle. She turned to the room, for the first time addressing the silent spectators of her humiliation. I apologize to you all for this unscheduled entertainment, she said, her voice carrying a dignity that made every person in the room feel small for having witnessed such pain. Tonight's art exhibition will continue as planned. I hope you enjoy the pieces on love, loss, and rebirth. It seems they've become more relevant than I imagined when I curated them. She gave a small, elegant, controlled, devastatingly dignified bow and turned to leave. Vicente took a step forward, finally letting go of Melissa. Laura, wait. She paused without turning back. 20 years, Vicente. 20 years of my life. I hope she was worth it. And then Laura Cavalcanti walked out of the ballroom the same way she had entered, with elegance, with dignity, with the grace of a woman who had just discovered she was far stronger than she had ever imagined. The silence she left behind was absolute. 200 people remained frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Not just the end of a marriage, but the destruction of a man and the birth of a new, powerful woman. Vicente stood in the center of the hall, Melissa still beside him. But now, she seemed more like a liability than a prize. At 45, the man who had built an empire discovered he had lost the only thing that truly mattered, and that the whole of Rio society had witnessed his fall. The gala continued, but no one would ever forget the night Laura Cavalcanti taught an entire elite the true meaning of the word dignity. 3 weeks after the gala, a beach house in Buzios, the sound of waves breaking on the sand was the morning's only soundtrack. Laura Cavalcanti sat on the wooden deck of the family beach house, watching the horizon where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky in a perfect infinite line. Her loose hair danced in the sea breeze, and for the first time in weeks, she wore no makeup to hide the traces of tears. 3 weeks. 21 days since the night that had split her life into a before and an after. 21 days since she had discovered she could survive the unthinkable. Not just survive, but find a strange peace in the wreckage of a 20-year marriage. Donna Laura, the soft voice of Conceição, the property's caretaker, broke through her thoughts. Would you like me to prepare lunch on the veranda, or would you prefer to eat here on the deck? Laura smiled, a genuine smile, not one of the social masks she had worn for so long. Here is perfect, Conceição. And please, just Laura. There's no need for formalities anymore. Conceição nodded, but Laura saw the maternal concern in her eyes. Over the past few days, the caretaker had become more than an employee. She was a comforting presence, a connection to a simplicity Laura had forgotten existed. The phone rang for the 10th time that morning. Laura didn't even bother to check who it was. It could be Fernanda Almeida wanting an exclusive interview. It could be a society friend searching for sordid details to gossip about. Or, worse, it could be Vicente. Vicente. Even after 3 weeks, The name still caused a tightness in her chest, no longer the ache of betrayed love, but a profound sadness for what they had lost, or perhaps for what they had never truly had. At the same moment, a penthouse in Copacabana, Vicente Cavalcanti stood before the panoramic window of his penthouse, gazing at the city that had once seemed to lie at his feet. Now, 3 weeks after the greatest humiliation of his life, it felt hostile, judgmental, as if every lit window were an eye watching him with contempt. The penthouse was exactly as Laura had left it. Her art books still on the shelves, her plants still carefully watered by Carmen, her clothes still in their shared closet. But her absence was tangible, like a black hole sucking all the life from the space. Mr. Vicente. Carmen appeared in the living room, her expression grim. Mr. Eduardo Marquez called again. He said it's urgent. Vicente sighed. Eduardo Marquez, president of the Federation of Industries and one of the most influential men in the country, had been one of his oldest business allies. Until 3 weeks ago. What does he want this time? He didn't say, sir, but his voice. Carmen hesitated. It didn't sound friendly. Vicente picked up the phone, already knowing it wouldn't be good news. For the last few days, bad news had been arriving like an unrelenting avalanche. Eduardo. Vicente. The voice on the other end was ice. We need to talk. In person. Now. About what? About the German investors who canceled the Barra project. About the clients who are terminating their contracts. About your reputation, which is sinking our association right along with you. Vicente felt his stomach clench. The German investors represented 40% of his future business. Eduardo, you can't, I can, and I will. Vicente, I warned you at the gala. That scandal wasn't just personal, it was professional. And now the entire business elite of Rio is questioning your judgment, your integrity, your leadership. The line went quiet for a few seconds before Eduardo continued. You humiliated a woman respected by our entire society, not just any woman. Laura Cavalcanti, who has more influential friends in this city than you can imagine. And you did it publicly, like a teenager showing off a trophy. It was a mistake, Eduardo. A moment of, a moment that cost you dearly, Vicente. The Cultural Foundation is removing your name from its list of patrons. The golf club is reviewing your membership. And I, personally, am terminating our partnership. Vicente felt the world spin. Eduardo, please, we can do nothing. You made your choice at that gala. Now live with the consequences. The line went dead, leaving Vicente holding the phone as if it were a venomous snake. A boutique in Ipanema. Melissa Andrade was trying on dresses in one of Ipanema's most expensive boutiques, but her reflection in the mirror made her feel sick. 3 weeks ago, she had been the most envied woman in Rio. Young, beautiful, on the arm of the city's most powerful CEO. Today, she was the other woman in one of the most talked about betrayals of the decade. This Chanel is divine on you, the saleswoman commented with professional enthusiasm. But Melissa saw the thinly veiled judgment in her eyes. Since the night of the gala, Melissa had become persona non grata in Rio's high society. Invitations to events were mysteriously canceled, advertising contracts were terminated due to budget changes, and even her influencer friends had stopped returning her messages. The worst part was Vicente. In the past few days, he had become a broken man, obsessed with his own social and professional downfall. When they were together, he spoke of nothing but the consequences of the gala. of how it had all been a mistake, of how Laura, always Laura, even after publicly destroying his marriage, Vicente could only talk about his ex-wife. And Melissa, who had believed she was the great passion of his life, discovered she had been nothing more than an expensive distraction for a man in a midlife crisis. You know what? Melissa said to the saleswoman, pulling off the dress. I'll leave it. I'm not buying anything today. She left the boutique, a decision crystallizing in her mind. Vicente Cavalcanti had promised a world he couldn't deliver. And in the process, he had destroyed not only his own marriage, but her reputation as well. It was time to cut her losses and move on. Buzios, Laura's beach house. Laura walked along the shore at dusk, her bare feet sinking into the sand, still warm from the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, she had no schedule to keep, no social engagements to attend, no need to be the perfect wife of a powerful CEO. Paradoxically, the freedom frightened her almost as much as it liberated her. Her phone vibrated with a message from Marina, her assistant. Laura, the Modern Gallery wants to talk about a solo exhibition of your work, and the Casa França Brazil asked if you would curate their summer show. The art world has its eyes on you. Laura smiled, surprised. For years, she had put her own career on the back burner to support Vicente's business. Now, ironically, the scandal that had destroyed her marriage was opening professional doors she never knew existed. Another text came through, this one from Beatrice, her best friend from college. My love, I just saw the article in Vogue, The Woman Who Redefined Dignity. You've become an icon. When I'm back in Rio, I'm taking you to dinner at Uro, and we'll catch up on all the gossip. Laura laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. An article in Vogue? She had no idea what Beatrice was talking about, but the thought that her public humiliation could have been transformed into something positive was both absurd and comforting. Copacabana, Vicente's penthouse. Vicente was sunk into the living room sofa, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table when Melissa arrived. She was still beautiful, perhaps more beautiful than ever, her determination giving her an almost magnetic aura. But Vicente felt nothing but a profound emptiness when he looked at her. We need to talk, Melissa said, not bothering with a greeting. If it's about tomorrow's dinner with the... There is no dinner tomorrow, Vicente. Not the day after. Not ever again. Vicente looked up, his eyes struggling to focus. What do you mean? I mean it's over. We're done. The whole charade ended that night at the hotel, but we were both too busy lamenting the consequences to realize it. Melissa sat in the armchair across from him, keeping her distance. Vicente, you promised me a world that didn't exist. You promised me you were free when you weren't. You promised you loved me when what you loved was the idea of having me. Melissa, You what? You love me? Even now, 3 weeks later, you can't go 5 minutes without talking about Laura. Laura who betrayed you. Laura who humiliated you. Laura who was your partner. Laura who knew you better than anyone. Melissa laughed, a bitter sound. Do you realize you don't talk about her as an ex-wife, but as the woman you lost? Vicente remained silent because he knew she was right. I was just a band-aid for your bruised ego, Vicente, a way to feel young and desired again. And you were my ticket to social climbing. Neither of us was in love. We were just using each other. Melissa stood, grabbing the purse she had left by the door. The difference is, I'm at least honest about it. And now? Vicente asked, his voice barely a whisper. Now, you deal with the consequences of your choices, and I'll deal with mine. Who knows? Maybe in the end, we all come out of this mess as better people. Bucios, night. Laura stood on the veranda, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the stars, which shone with a clarity impossible in the city. The silence of the beach was a comfort, unlike the deafening silence of the ballroom 3 weeks ago. Her laptop was open on the table, and for the first time in years, she was working on a project that was entirely her own, not a curation for Vicente's foundation, not an event to impress clients, but an exhibition about women who were reborn, artists who had rebuilt their lives after great loss. It was ironic how much she now identified with their work. The phone rang, and this time, Laura checked the screen. It was Vicente. For a moment, she hesitated. After 3 weeks of silence, part of her was curious to hear what he had to say. Another part still felt the sting of a wounded love. But a larger part, a new part, that had been born that night in the hotel, simply no longer cared. She declined the call and returned to her work. Outside, the waves continued to break on the sand with the same constancy they had always had, with the same majestic indifference to human drama they had always held. And Laura found comfort in that constancy, in that silent promise that life goes on, that pain passes, that it is possible to begin again. At 42, Laura Cavalcanti was discovering who she was when she wasn't someone's wife. And for the first time in 2 decades, she was eager to meet this woman. 6 months later, Laura Cavalcanti, Gallery Eponema, Garcia Davila Street, had never seen an event like it. Imported cars lined the entire block, while photographers vied for the best angles on the sidewalk. Rio's intellectual and artistic elite mingled with entrepreneurs, politicians, and socialites, all eager to witness the opening of the gallery. The press was calling the most impressive rebirth of the decade. Laura Cavalcanti stood before the mirror in her new office at the back of the gallery, admiring her reflection with a feeling she had forgotten existed, a genuine pride in herself. The emerald green silk dress embraced her mature curves with elegance, but it was different from the restrained elegance of her days as a CEO's wife. This was a powerful, self-assured elegance, charged with an energy that radiated from within. Her hair, now shorter and with golden highlights framing her face, danced lightly as she put on her earrings. Not the conservative pearls of before, but contemporary pieces by an emerging Brazilian designer she had discovered and decided to champion. Laura! Marina appeared at the door, beaming with excitement. You have to see this. The line is around the corner. Fernanda Almeida just arrived, and she brought her entire magazine staff. And there's more. Laura smiled, feeling a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. 6 months ago, she was Laura Cavalcanti, wife of. Today, she was simply Laura Cavalcanti, a respected curator, an innovative gallerist, a woman who had turned a public humiliation into the launch pad for her own extraordinary life. What else, Marina? The governor has confirmed. The mayor is already here, and Marina hesitated. Vicente is here. Laura's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes shifted, a new depth, as if she were looking not just at the present moment, but at the entire journey that had brought her here. Of course he is, she murmured, more to herself than to Marina. Tonight is about closing cycles. The main hall of the gallery was a symphony of light, art, and elegant conversation. The exhibited works, paintings, sculptures, and installations by female artists who had overcome great adversity created a powerful visual dialogue with Laura's own journey. At the center of the exhibition, a monumental canvas by Beatrice Milhazes dominated the space. Phoenix Rising, an explosion of vibrant colors that depicted a woman emerging from the flames of her own transformation. Vicente had been standing before that painting for 15 minutes, as if mesmerized. 6 months had transformed the man who once seemed to own the world. He had lost weight, the gray in his hair now starkly white at the temples, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a true humility born of pain and regret. Melissa was not by his side. She hadn't been anywhere in his life for 4 months. After ending their relationship, she had moved to Sao Paulo, where she landed a job as a marketing director for a cosmetics brand. On the rare occasions they spoke, it was always cordial, almost friendly. Two former accomplices who had learned to forgive themselves and each other. It's a powerful piece, isn't it? Vicente turned at the sound of the voice that had haunted his dreams for 6 months. She stood a few feet away, holding a glass of champagne, more beautiful than he remembered. But it was a different kind of beauty, one charged with a strength he had never perceived when they were married. Laura. He said her name like a prayer, a plea for forgiveness, a declaration of lost love, all condensed into a single word. Vicente. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture that was at once formal and intimate. Thank you for coming. They stood before the painting for a few moments, two ex-spouses united by art and separated by a history that could not be rewritten. How are you? Vicente asked, and the question carried 6 months of sleepless nights, of regret, of unanswered calls, and unsent letters. I'm well, Laura replied, and for the first time in their 20 years of marriage, Vicente believed her completely. In fact, I'm better than well. I'm whole. The word struck Vicente like a painful revelation. For 20 years, he had assumed that Laura needed him to be whole. His financial stability, his social status, his protection. To discover that she had not only survived without him, but had thrived in a way he had never been able to provide, was both humbling and admirable. Laura, I need to tell you, he began, but she gently raised a hand. Vicente, no, not tonight. Tonight is about celebrating new beginnings, not revisiting endings. But I need you to know that you regret it, that it was a mistake, that you love me. Laura smiled, and there was no bitterness in it, only a melancholic wisdom. I know, Vicente. I always knew. Vicente fell silent, realizing that Laura had grown beyond anything he could have understood 6 months ago. The question, Laura continued, was never whether you loved me. The question was whether you respected me. And that night at the hotel, I finally got my answer. The wound still ached, Vicente could see, but it was the clean pain of a successful surgery, not the infection of resentment. Across the room, Fernanda Almeida watched the interaction with the sharp eye of someone who had turned covering social scandals into an art form. 6 months ago, she had witnessed the destruction of a marriage. Tonight, she was witnessing something much rarer, the complete rebirth of a woman. Roberto, are you getting this? She whispered to her photographer. Every second. But I have to say, Fernanda, this doesn't feel like a scandal anymore. It feels like a redemption. Fernanda nodded slowly. That's exactly what it is. Laura Cavalcanti is no longer the woman who was humiliated at that ball. She's the woman who used that humiliation to find herself. Laura excused herself politely and made her way to the center of the room, where a small stage had been set up for her opening speech. The murmur of conversation gradually died down as she climbed the steps, all eyes turning to the woman who had become, unintentionally, a symbol of reinvention and dignity. Good evening. Her voice was clear and confident, carrying easily to every corner of the gallery. When I began planning this exhibition, I chose the theme Women Reborn because I am fascinated by the human capacity to transform pain into art, trauma into beauty, and endings into new beginnings. She paused, her eyes sweeping lightly over the crowd, landing for a moment on Vicente before continuing. What I didn't expect was to find that I would become part of that narrative myself. 6 months ago, I was a respected curator, but I lived in someone else's shadow. Today, I am simply myself, and I've discovered that is more than enough. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Several women present, many of whom had gone through difficult divorces or painful life transitions, felt a deep recognition in Laura's words. This gallery is not just a space to exhibit art, it's a manifesto on the possibility of starting over, on the beauty that can be born from what looks like complete destruction. Every piece here tells the story of a woman who refused to be defined by what happened to her, choosing instead to be defined by what she did with what happened to her. Vicente felt tears burn in his eyes. The woman on the stage was Laura, but at the same time, she was someone entirely new. A version of Laura he had never allowed to exist during their 20 years of marriage. She had flourished in his absence in a way that made him question if his presence in her life had, all along, been more of a hindrance than a support. I want to thank everyone here tonight, Laura continued, not just for supporting this gallery, but for reminding me that our community is capable of celebrating not only success, but transformation. You have taught me that sometimes the greatest act of courage is to simply keep living, keep creating, keep believing in the possibility of better days. The applause started softly and grew into a prolonged ovation. Laura descended from the stage with the grace of a woman who had found her place in the world, not as half of a couple, not as someone's support, but as the protagonist of her own story. The rest of the evening flowed with the elegance of a well-orchestrated dream. Laura circulated among the guests like a perfect hostess, but there was an authenticity to her interactions that had never existed at the events she organized for Vicente. She wasn't playing a role, she was simply being herself. Vicente stayed until the very end, watching from a distance as the woman he had lost became the woman she was always meant to be. Around midnight, as the last guests were leaving, he approached her one last time. Laura, she turned, unsurprised to find him there. Vicente, I just wanted to say, you're radiant, not just tonight, but there's a light in you I never noticed before. Laura offered a sad smile. She was always there, Vicente. You just never looked in the right direction. The truth of her words struck Vicente like a punch to the gut. For 20 years, he had looked at Laura and seen a perfect wife, an elegant hostess, a talented curator. But he had never truly seen Laura, the woman with her own dreams, her independent ambitions, her need to be seen and valued for who she was, not for the role she played in his life. Can I, can I ask you something? Vicente asked, his voice barely a whisper. You can. Forgive me? Not for the affair. I know that's unforgivable, but for not seeing you. For wasting 20 years of your life by keeping you smaller than you were meant to be. Laura was silent for a long moment, studying the face of the man who had been her husband, her partner, her greatest mistake, and her greatest teacher. Vicente, she said at last, I forgive you. But more importantly, I forgive myself. For settling for less than I deserved, for hiding in your shadow, for taking 20 years to find out who I truly am. They embraced, not as former lovers, but as two people who, at the end of a shared life, had arrived at a new, painful understanding of themselves and each other. As they parted, Vicente began to walk away, but Laura called out to him, Vicente? Yes? I hope you find your own way too. I hope you discover who you are when you're not trying to be everything to everyone. You deserve that discovery as much as I deserved mine. Vicente found he couldn't speak. He walked out of the gallery and into the Ipanema night, knowing he was no longer the same man who had walked in just hours earlier. Laura remained alone in her gallery, surrounded by the works she had chosen with such care, each one telling a story of transformation and rebirth. She moved slowly among the pieces, her own tears finally falling, not tears of sadness, but of a profound gratitude for having survived the storm and discovering she could fly. On the opposite wall, an antique mirror reflected her image. Laura approached and looked at herself. Really looked. Perhaps for the first time in her adult life. She saw a 42-year-old woman with eyes bright with possibility, hair that danced with a life of its own, a posture that spoke of strength earned through pain. Hello, Laura, she whispered to her reflection. We finally meet. Outside, the city of Rio slept, unaware that it had just witnessed not only the opening of a gallery, but the complete birth of a woman who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And in the pre-dawn silence, surrounded by art that celebrated the human capacity for rebirth, Laura Cavalcanti smiled at her future, a future that was, at long last, entirely her own. 6 months ago, she had been humiliated in front of 200 people. Today, she was an inspiration to thousands. 6 months ago, she was half of a broken couple. Today, she was a whole woman. And for the first time in her adult life, that was more than enough. It was everything.